The first scream hit me before the sun did, sharp, furious, echoing off the cliff like a warning shot. I was only halfway up the rock face fingers, locked into cold granite, when Vivian Ashcraft stormed onto the balcony above me in a blinding
Stop right
fuchsia
there,
suit,
you cannot
flanked
pass.
by 3 armed guards.
I made it!
Get off my property or I'll have you arrested. I didn't look up. Not until I pulled a laminated survey from my jacket and let the wind snap it like a flag. Ma'am, this cliff isn't yours.
This is
It
your
belongs
last
to the
chance,
federal
Vivian.
government. Then I raised my badge. And as of this morning, so do you. Her face collapsed because she knew exactly what I meant. And she knew I wasn't climbing up. I was coming for her. I didn't walk into that county auction looking for a home. I walked in looking for the truth, one that had dodged me for 3 long years. But the moment Lot 47 flashed onto the projector, everything inside me locked into place. It wasn't the photograph that caught me. It was the architecture, the impossible geometry balancing over the Pacific, the glass lines drawn like a promise. I had seen those angles before, traced them with my fingers on old paper. Elena had drawn them first. 20 years earlier, we were 2 broke dreamers, living in a tiny apartment with more hope than furniture. She'd spend nights sketching a house she believed could live with the land rather than fight it, anchored into the rock, suspended over the sea. She called it our impossible place. She never got to build it. And when a fraudulent geological report approved a development that should never have existed, a landslide took her life and my future with it. Every attempt I made to investigate ended with missing files, officials shrugging, or doors quietly closing. But then Lot 47 appeared. Her house, her design, built by someone else on a cliff I knew wasn't unstable. That wasn't coincidence. It was a trail. My day-to-day life had shrunk to consulting jobs, long drives, and nights flipping through Elena's notebook like a ritual. But seeing her dream, standing in real glass and concrete, dragged me out of survival mode and straight back into purpose. When Vivian Ashcraft stepped into the auction head, high fuchsia suit, blazing voice, dripping ownership, my suspicions sharpened. She didn't want that property because it was condemned. She wanted it because it wasn't. The bidding war wasn't about money. It was about control. And the moment I outbid her, I saw it, the flicker in her eyes that told me I had stepped into a story she'd been writing alone for 12 years. When I reached the cliff house for the first time, climbing through fog that pressed close like a secret, everything confirmed my instincts. New bolts on fake warning signs, fresh chains on the road gate, a geological report signed by a man who'd been dead for years. The house wasn't unsafe. It was silenced. And Vivian, who thought she owned every inch of this ridge, had no idea I was the one person who could read the rock beneath her lies. She was expecting another frightened homeowner. Instead, she got me. The first attack didn't come from Vivian herself. It came from paper. A bright red tag slapped onto my door at sunrise: immediate violation, unsafe occupancy. No contact name, no signature. By noon, 2 HOA inspectors were pacing around the house, pretending to check measurements while blatantly photographing my windows. Every time I stepped outside, their radios crackled with whispers that stopped the second I got close. The harassment escalated quietly, new warning signs drilled into the cliff path overnight, random HOA brochures stuffed under the door, a printed evacuation schedule taped to my truck windshield. None of it matched reality. Condemned property was county jurisdiction, not HOA, but Vivian's people acted like they owned the ridge. The rock was stable, the house was stable. The only thing shaking was the story Vivian had built, and she knew it. 2 mornings later, the line snapped. I stepped into the living room and found 3 guards already inside, boots on my floors, cameras out, pointing at walls they didn't have the right to cross. "You're trespassing," I said. One guard didn't even look at me. "Authorized HOA inspection." "This home isn't HOA property," I shot back. "Show me the legal order." He didn't. Instead, they continued taking photos, muttering measurements I knew were meaningless. That afternoon, the fines arrived: $5, 600 non-compliant occupancy. $3,000, interference with official assessment. $1, 200, hazardous obstruction. The amounts were ridiculous, designed to break people who didn't have the strength to question them. By sunset, the security cameras I'd installed were torn off their mounts, smashed in plain sight, the pieces left scattered like a threat. Vivian had stopped pretending. This wasn't an HOA conflict. This was territorial warfare. The threat turned physical the next morning. My mailbox wasn't just damaged, it was executed. Crushed flat split, open, its contents spilled across the steps like a warning. Everything was destroyed, except one envelope taped neatly to the railing. 6 words: "You won't be here much longer." That evening I hiked down the cliff path and found the access gate wrapped with a massive industrial chain that hadn't been there the day before. Hung from it was a laminated inspection tag with a familiar signature, Dr. Myron Selich. My chest tightened. Selich was the geologist Vivian used on every condemnation. He was also 7 years dead. I followed the freshly drilled bolts along the cliff line brand new, the dust still clinging to the granite. They supported fake warning signs, claiming rapid erosion and immediate danger. Behind one sign was a plastic sleeve holding photos of the house taken long before it was condemned. Angles only a surveyor would choose. That was the moment I stopped wondering. The cliff wasn't unstable, the house wasn't unsafe. The threat wasn't natural. Vivian was manufacturing a disaster and framing me inside it. At dawn, the sheriff arrived. Not the whole department, just one cruiser, one deputy, hands already resting near his holster. "Mr. Calloway," he called out, "you've been reported for illegal occupation of condemned land." I handed him the deed, the NOAA stability report, and the federal boundary survey. He read them slowly, too slowly. "This doesn't match what Mrs. Ashcraft told us." "Because she didn't tell you the truth," I said. "This cliff is federally designated. County condemnation doesn't apply." He looked conflicted, like a man standing between two versions of reality and not sure which one he could afford to believe. "She insists the structure is unsafe," he said finally, "and she wants you removed for your own safety." I almost laughed. He stepped away to radio his supervisor. I caught fragments: Ashcraft, federal boundary, doesn't add up, surveyor deceased. When he returned, the unease was written all over him. "Sir, until this is cleared up, I'm supposed to escort you off the property." Her reach was deeper than I'd realized, but her story was starting to crack. A soft knock came at midnight, hesitant, almost apologetic. An older man stood in the fog, clothes-worn, thin eyes, sharp despite the exhaustion. "You're the new owner of Lot 47, he said. Finally, someone who didn't fold. His name was Thorne. 40 years as a structural engineer. One home destroyed by Vivian's false condemnation. One wife lost to the stress that followed. He carried a cardboard box stuffed with papers, surveys, letters, financial logs, photos. 12 years, he said. Every property she wanted miraculously unstable. Same signatures, same surveyor, same playbook. I flipped through the files until a familiar logo punched the breath from my lungs. A geological consulting firm. In California, the same firm responsible for the fraudulent report that approved the development where Elena died. A payment from Vivian to that firm, dated months before the landslide. My vision tunneled. Vivian didn't just condemn my wife's dream house. She didn't just forge reports. She bankrolled the disaster that killed Elena. Thorne watched me absorb it, the grief, the clarity, the resolve. "So, what now?" he asked quietly. I closed the folder. Now I said we stop letting her bury the truth. The HOA meeting wasn't a meeting, it was a performance. 50 homeowners sat in neat rows as Vivian stood at the podium in her newest fuchsia suit, radiating authority like she owned the oxygen in the room. "Thank you all for coming," she said sweetly. "We have a serious threat to community safety. A man illegally occupying a condemned cliff structure." "Actually," I said, stepping through the doors, "I was hoping we could talk about who forged the condemnation." Every head snapped toward me. Vivian frozen. Just for a second. Just long enough for everyone to see the crack. I walked down the aisle slowly, deliberately, the way divers walk toward deep water. "How many of you received geological reports signed by Dr. Myron Selich?" About a dozen hands rose. "Interesting," I said, connecting my phone to the projector, "because Dr. Selich has been dead since 2015. Gasps, whispers, a ripple of fear. I displayed his death certificate across the screen. Vivian's warmth evaporated. "This meeting is adjourned." No one moved. For the first time, she realized her voice wasn't enough to control the room. The truth had entered, and it demanded an audience. Vivian stormed out the side door, but the room didn't empty. Instead, people surged toward me, voices overlapping, years of suppressed questions spilling out. That's when Emmeline, the HOA treasurer, approached with trembling hands. "I need to speak with you. Not here." Her voice cracked. "Tomorrow. Sunrise. The Cliff House." Then she left. The next morning, she arrived carrying a small USB drive. She looked older than she had the night before, like the truth had finally caught her. "These are the real books," she whispered. "The ones she hid from auditors." I plugged it into my laptop. 12 years of financial records unfolded across the screen. Bribes to county officials, payments to fake surveyors, construction approvals rubber-stamped without inspection, shell companies purchasing condemned properties, and Then the one record that made the room tilt, a direct payment to the California firm responsible for the landslide that killed Elena. Emmeline's voice broke. She used the same scam on my grandson's home. The letter came yesterday. They're condemning it next. I looked at her, at the weight she had carried, at the guilt she finally refused to hold. You just gave me everything I said. No, she whispered. I gave her everything for 12 years. This is me taking it back. Behind us, sirens echoed faintly across the ridge. The storm was coming. At 6:47 a.m., 3 sheriff cruisers lined up at the cliff road. Deputies stepped out with hands on their holsters. Brennan Calloway, the lead officer, shouted, "You're under arrest for trespassing and harassment of community officials." Vivian watched from a white SUV behind them, smiling like she'd already won. I walked out onto the balcony, hands raised. "Before you put those cuffs on, ask her who forged the geological reports." "She filed them legally," the deputy insisted. "With a surveyor who's been dead 7 years?" He hesitated. Vivian stepped forward. "Remove him. Now." And that was the exact moment the sound hit engines heavy and synchronized. Black SUVs flooded the road from both sides, boxing in Vivian's vehicle. Federal plates, tactical vests, raised badges, U.S. Marshals, EPA Criminal Investigations, FBI Fraud Division. Keegan stepped out of the lead SUV. "Release him," he ordered. The cuffs came off. Agents surrounded Vivian before she could run, before she could protest, before she could invent another lie. Vivian Ashcraft. An agent read, "You are under arrest for federal fraud, environmental crimes, bribery, conspiracy, obstruction, and the unlawful condemnation of protected land." Vivian's face crumpled, not with guilt, but with the horror of someone realizing her world wasn't collapsing. It had already collapsed. She was just the last to notice. They escorted her into the SUV as dawn broke over the water, the exact cliff she once claimed to own. Now, it belonged to the truth. The arrest shook Promontory Crest like an earthquake, not the geological kind, but the kind built from truth, finally cracking open 12 years of silence. The next HOA meeting looked nothing like Vivian's empire. No fuchsia banners, no polished podium, no guards shadowing the walls. Instead, 50 homeowners crowded into the community barn, buzzing with something the ridge hadn't felt in a long time: relief. Thorne stood at the front shoulders, squared voice steady for the first time since he told me his story. "We weren't unstable," he said. "The cliff wasn't unstable. She was unstable." Laughter rose, quiet at first, then louder, rippling through the room like a collective exhale. Emmeline stood next. Her voice trembled but never broke. "I enabled her for 12 years. I looked away. I told myself it wasn't my place, and I was wrong." She bowed her head. "I'm turning myself in tomorrow. I will testify to every document I filed." No one jeered. No one shouted. Instead, people simply nodded. Accountability at last. Neighbors approached me afterward, some grateful, some angry at themselves for not seeing it sooner, some crying because they finally understood they were victims, not failures. One woman hugged me so tightly I felt her heartbeat. "You didn't just save our homes," she whispered. "You saved our sanity." I didn't feel like a hero, just a man who finally stopped running from the truth. The legal dominoes fell faster than anyone expected. Vivian Ashcraft received 22 years in federal prison, multiple counts of fraud, bribery, environmental crime, and conspiracy. She didn't go down quietly, but she went down completely. Her son Felix testified against her, handing over private messages, internal HOA files, and evidence of shell companies she'd tried to hide offshore. He received a lighter sentence, 2 years probation, but the betrayal cut deeper than any prison term. Vivian built an empire by controlling everyone around her. In the end, even her own family refused to stand with her. Councilman Ridge Davenport took a plea deal: 18 months in federal custody, lifetime ban from public office, mandatory restitution to displaced homeowners. The county assessor fled to Mexico the night before his arrest. The U.S. Marshals found him 3 months later, selling timeshares in Cancun under a fake name. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Federal prosecutors reopened every property Vivian had condemned. 7 homes were restored to their original owners. 3 families received full compensation. 4 wrongful foreclosures were overturned by the courts. Thorne got his house back. He cried when he walked through the door. But the biggest win came from Dr. Sable Morrow. The entire ridge was officially classified as protected habitat for the marbled murrelet. No more fraudulent building. No more destruction. No more lies buried in unstable soil. Vivian's legacy of corruption ended where it began, on the rock she tried to control and never truly understood. 6 months later, the Cliff House felt different. Not because I remodeled it, I didn't. Not because it was safer, it always had been. But because it finally belonged to someone who respected it. To someone who understood what it was built from. Elena's sketch, her dream house, hung, framed on the main wall. The morning light hit it perfectly, just the way she used to imagine it in our little apartment years ago. When the wind came in off the Pacific, the whole place breathed with the rhythm of the coastline. A living structure, a promise fulfilled. Some people asked why I stayed, how I could live in a place so tied to grief. They didn't understand. This wasn't a monument to loss. It was proof that some dreams survive theft, corruption, and even death. Vivian stole designs but never understood meaning. She stole homes but never understood belonging. She stole truth but never understood that truth has a way of resurfacing just like rock under pressure. One evening, I found a note tucked inside Elena's old notebook. I must have read it 100 times, but this time it hit differently. Build something that matters. I thought exposing Vivian was the end of the story, but it wasn't. The real ending was quieter. It was seeing Thorne's grandkids running down a path once labeled unsafe. It was hearing homeowners talk about rebuilding, not fearing. It was waking up in a house that finally felt like home, not because it was mine, but because I had defended what it stood for. That night I closed the balcony, doors breathed in the salt air, and whispered to Elena, "We built something that matters." And for the first time in years I slept without dreaming of the past, only the future.